Why do we follow Christ? Why do we follow Jesus? If we could boil it down to one ultimate reason, it would be because he is the truth. I am the way, the truth, the life, he says. Not because following him is easy. Not because following him is convenience. Not because when we follow Christ, suddenly everything we've ever wanted in this world falls into our lap. Why do we go to church? Why do we discern between the Orthodox Church, the Catholic Church, the Protestant evangelical churches? Why do we join a church and confess that church's faith? Well, for the same reason that we follow Christ. Why? Because Jesus is the church. Jesus is the church, right? The church is the body of Christ. The church is equal to Christ. And so if the only ultimate reason we follow Christ is because he is the truth, the way, the truth, the life, and the church is Christ, then we choose a church, we join a church, we confess a faith of a church because it is the truth. Now, the Orthodox Church is very ethnic, right? I'm not going to pretend it's not. You have Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Romanian, Serbian. And for a lot of people, this can be an obstacle. A lot of people living in the West who are Western, looking into an Orthodox church and see such an Eastern European ethnic tie, it can be an issue, and it's valid. I don't blame you whatsoever. It's difficult. I remember my first time walking into an Orthodox church. It was a Greek Orthodox church, and I don't speak Greek. I'm a very Western man, and so hearing an entire service done in a language that I have no idea what it's saying, seeing so many Eastern European cultures and ways of life that are completely alien to me, yes, it causes friction. But as I said in the beginning, why do we follow Christ and why do we go to church? Not because it's easy, not because it's convenient, not because when we choose to follow Christ and choose to join a church, we suddenly fit right on in. We join a church, we follow Christ because he is the truth. A lot of people, as I mentioned, bring this critique up when discerning the Orthodox Church versus the Western churches. They say that the Orthodox Church is ethnic, it's Greek, Russian, this, that. And as a Western man who speaks English, I find this difficult. But you need to be very honest with yourself. If the only reason you are not becoming an Orthodox Christian, if the only reason you don't want to step into the Orthodox faith is because it's ethnic, because it speaks a different language to you, because it has a different culture to the Western way of life, what you're, in other words, saying is that you hold something above truth. What you're, in other words, saying is that ease, convenience, fitting in is more important to you than truth. Orthodoxy, Catholicism, Protestantism aside, imagine you truly found the one true church that Christ established. You would join, right? You would step right in. It's the true church. Like you 100,000,000,000% knew that it was the true church. But then imagine you saw that it was a bit ethnic. Imagine you saw it spoke a different language than English. You know, it had a different culture, way of life than your way of life. You're telling me that you wouldn't walk in? You're telling me that you would walk out? You would go elsewhere? As I said, what you're saying in turn is that there's something above truth. So I want to make this very clear early on. The only reason that you go to a church is because of the truth, right? Not because it's easy, not because it's convenient. But now I am going to address some very valid concerns regarding the Orthodox Church. When you join a church, you give your life to it, okay? You make it your whole life. It doesn't just become every Sunday, all right? I'm not saying I'm good at this. I'm the worst at this, all right? But I know what the church demands. I know what Christ demands. And it's, hey, I don't want 1% of you. I want everything of you, okay? I'm a jealous God. Not because I want you to serve me and I want to be your master, but because I know that without me, you will get nowhere. And I love you like a father. And if you're not with me, I know you're going to be very lost, all right? It's out of love. Let's not get that misunderstood, okay? And so joining the church, you're going to be giving your life to it, right? It's going to become a community. It's a living organism. Not long ago, I was helping out with house blessings, and I truly experienced this firsthand. The church was not just a group of people who got together every Sunday to put their hands in the air and woohoo, Jesus. It's a living organism. It's breathing. It's actually alive, right? It has a real breath that you can feel. I mean, it's a tremendous experience as someone who has never been in a religious area, okay? Never had any religious experience before and has been raised atheist. Like the fact that I went so long without this community, without this living organism that I could be a part of, not out of any of my work, but out of love, out of the grace of God. It's absolutely amazing, okay? My point is that the church is going to be alive, right? If you want to take it seriously, right? If you want to get the most out of it, of course, everyone's efforts is going to be different. That's between them and God, okay? And so you want to choose the right church, right? And as you're discerning between churches, you want to choose a church that you can step into. And this is a good concern, okay? You need to recognize the severe gravity if you're someone who's in a position of discerning between churches. This church, as I mentioned, is not going to be just every Sunday. It's every day of your life. The church that you join is the faith that you're going to be confessing. And therefore, it's the faith that you're going to be called to live for every second of your existence. It is where you're not only going to live, but it's where you're going to move on. It's where you're going to meet so many people. It's where you're going to establish so many connections and so many relationships. Don't take this situation for granted. Don't give it nothing more than the energy and the time and the respect that it deserves. Okay, like seriously, right? I can't make this more clear. This is where you're going to spend the rest of your life. This is where, if you have a partner, a girlfriend, a wife, where you're going to be going there with her, where you're going to be raising your children, okay? Make it the most important thing in your life as someone who's been through that. I cannot stress enough how important it is. And I say this to a lot of people who are looking into convert to a Christian church, whether they're Catholic, Protestant, or Orthodox, okay? I don't say to them, you're utterly wrong, you need to become Orthodox. I say to them this: on the day you become baptized into the church you want to join, or chrismated, whatever, the day you confess that church's faith, you want to know, undoubtedly, that you found the truth, all right? You don't want to have in the back of your head, hey, I actually don't think I placed truth as high as a priority as I should have. Hey, did I place something above truth? Did I place ease or convenience or fitting in above truth? And this is something that I took very seriously in my conversion, where I went and experienced multiple Orthodox churches, multiple Catholic churches. I visited a Protestant church here, an evangelical church here, all right? Take this situation seriously, all right? Now, moving back to the topic of orthodoxy being ethnic, all right? It has very valid historical reasons. Very valid historical reasons. And when we are critiquing the fact that the Orthodox Church is ethnic, what we're also saying from another angle is that when you look to the Western churches, they are not as ethnic, and therefore they're more accessible, they're more less distant, and it's as if they want you more than the Orthodox Church wants. And that experience is valid. I definitely felt that within my conversion process. I had thoughts in my head such as, if the Orthodox Church is the true Church of Christ, why aren't they making it as accessible as the Western churches are to the Western man? But when you see just how these Western churches came to be so accessible, so less distant, you will see that it did not come without negative consequences. And when you also look into the Orthodox churches and you look at what they're trying to do to become more accessible, you will see that they are actually doing a lot of things, putting a lot of effort. So let's dive into it, right? First, I'm going to begin with how specifically the Roman Catholic Church today has become so seemingly universal, so seemingly accessible and less distant to the Western man. Then I'm going to focus in on orthodoxy and how it's becoming more accessible, but also what that means for the Orthodox faith and how it needs to be careful in that there's becoming more accessible, but then there's actually losing the Orthodox faith. So let's begin with the first century, all right? Let's go right back to the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul, seriously, is one of the most influential Christian figures of all time. He was one of the people who really brought me to my faith in Christ. If you could learn about really any figure who's very interesting as well, of course, everyone in early Christianity is interesting, but he is amazing. His life is extraordinary, okay? He never met Christ, right? He lived at the same time with Jesus, but never met him. Rather, on his road to Damascus, he had an experience of the grace of God, a vision, if you will, okay? And he was a very zealous Jew who hated the idea of Christianity. He was actually there, I believe, or at least was there to affirm the first martyr of Christ, Saint Stephen, the first martyr, okay? So the only way to really justify his full 180, his full conversion to Christ is, well, the fact that Christ is God, okay? But we're not talking about that today. He goes all around the Mediterranean world as a missionary, helping to establish the first churches. Not only do we get to see his life just in this abstract idea, but we have firsthand, intimate accounts of this. You have this in your Bible. There's 14 letters, and I'm sure you've heard of them, right? You have the letter to the Galatians, the letter to the Philippians, the Corinthians, the Romans, the Hebrews, the letter to Timothy. You can read these yourself. And what you overwhelmingly see through the life of Paul, through his works, is that not only do you see how the first Christian communities came to be established, came to be set up, but you get to see how they acted, right? How they operated, what their problems were, how they lived. Because remember, the church is a living organism. And this is what you will overwhelmingly see. The church of the first 100 years were all geographically separated, right? Just like today, right? You have the church in Greece, modern day Turkey, in Rome, in Jerusalem, Antioch, Alexandria, but they are all ethnically separated as well. Not just geographically, but they are all ethnically separated. They all linguistically separated. They all speak various different languages. They all culturally express their faith differently. If you were to walk into a church in Rome in the first 100 AD years, and then walk into a church in Greece, in Jerusalem, it would be very different. They would have a different tongue. They would have a different expression, almost exactly like the Orthodox Church today. The Orthodox Church today, Russian, Greek, Romanian, Serbian, ethnically separated, linguistically separated, cultural expressions are different. But just like the original church, just like the early church to today, they are all united in one faith, one Jesus Christ, and one Eucharist. Now, you might say to me, cool, but that was 2,000 years ago. Today, we live in a very modernistic, globalistic age. What is stopping the Orthodox Church from being accessible, from being less distant, like the Western churches have become today? And to you, I would say, no, it wasn't just 2,000 years ago. This is the majority of human history. And these changes within the Western churches to become more accessible, less distant, are very recent, very modern. The church for majority of its time is like this, is exactly like how the Orthodox Church is today, how it was within the early church. Ethnically separated, cultural expressions are very different, linguistically separated, all speaking different languages, but all united in one faith, all united in one Eucharist and one Jesus Christ, all right? If we're going to understand then how the Roman Catholic Church came to be how it is today, seemingly very universal and seemingly very accessible, well, we need to look at the history of the Roman Catholic Church and just broad church history. The church was one for the first 1,000 years, okay? More or less one. Sure, you had schismatics here, heretics here, but everyone more or less agrees the church was one. Then at around the turn of the first millennia, okay, looking at the 11th, 12th, 13th century, the East and West begin to split. Right, the issue of authority within the church comes to a head. The Pope believes that he has supreme authority over the church, and then all the Eastern patriarchs believe that the Pope has honor, has primacy within the church, the collegial structure of the church, but doesn't have supremacy over the bishops. The Pope says he does, so the Pope excommunicates the East. The East said, no, you don't. So then the East excommunicates the Pope, right? Very oversimplified, right? Extremely oversimplified, right? The Pope goes his own way in the West with the Roman Church, and then the Eastern Patriarchs, the four other Eastern Patriarchs of Constantinople, Jerusalem, Antioch, Alexandria, go their own way. The reason why this is crucial to understand is because now the Roman Catholic Church, the Pope in the West, is in a position where it's extremely centralized. There's only one leader, and this one leader believes that he has universal jurisdiction over the church. And so changes, all right, keeping things consistent become extremely easy. Whereas in the East, and of course, just keeping it very simple, right? Constantinople, Jerusalem, Antioch, Alexandria, they are all autocephalous churches, all right? Where they do Constantinople as the new Rome, but Constantinople isn't now just the leader of the church, as in how the Pope is the leader of the Roman Catholic Church. And so the ability for the Pope in the West, in the Roman Catholic Church, to make things a lot more normative, a lot more streamlined and simple and universal is so much easier than the Eastern Orthodox Church, which doesn't have that structure, doesn't have that base foundation that the Roman Catholic Church has. And so naturally, if we look at what occurs in the East and West Schism, and then we add 1,000 years, we go all the way to today, it makes sense what we see in the Roman Catholic Church. Well, because it's always just been the Roman Catholic Church under one ultimate authority. Whereas if you look to the Eastern Orthodox Church, and you see how, just very simplifying it, you have the Patriarch of Constantinople, Antioch, Alexandria, Jerusalem, and whatnot, all leaders of the church, but not one having supreme authority over the church. Well, then 1,000 years today, is exactly what we should expect today in the Orthodox Church, which is what we see. It's exactly what we see, all right? We have multiple groups with different leaders, but importantly, they're all united in one faith, one Eucharist, one Jesus Christ. But it's just a continuation of not only what we saw in the early church, but also what we see at around 1000 AD, just to keep it simple, and then where we see today, right, the year 2026, right? What then led the Roman Catholic Church to become more accessible, to become more appealing to the Western eye? We need to understand Roman Catholic Church history here, okay? Specifically Vatican II. If you're a Roman Catholic, if you're discerning between the Orthodox and the Catholic Church, look, of course, at both churches' history, but really look as well at the Roman Catholic Church history. Look at Vatican II, Vatican I. These are important things that if you want to become a Roman Catholic, these will mean a lot to you, okay? For basically 99% of the Roman Catholic Church's history, it did not have an idea of speaking the vernacular language, right? What does that mean? So the vernacular language basically means that if you live in Australia or America, the church will be speaking English, right? The Roman Catholic Church will speak English. If you live in Spain, Spanish, Poland, Polish. This was a change that the Roman Catholic Church did within Vatican II. That was not there in the Roman Catholic Church before Vatican II. Before Vatican II, if you were to go to a Roman Catholic Church, it would be in Latin. Not only would it be in Latin, but the Mass would be different, okay? Vatican II not only changed it so that the vernacular language would be present, but it also introduced a new Mass. Of course, it would be a continuation of the former Mass in their words. It introduced the Novus Order, okay? The New Order Mass. This was a continuation, in their words, of the Latin Mass, of the Tridentine Mass, the Mass that had been done all the way from the Council of Trent in the year 1500 to 1965 Vatican II. It's the Latin Mass, the TOM. So not only did it make it so that the local language could be now used, but it came with other changes. And a lot of people, Roman Catholic, not Roman Catholic, would say that this was a severe change, even a negative change. And just to emphasize this, it led to a lot of radical offshoot groups. The Society of St. Pius X, Sedevacantists, Old Catholics, just a lot of very traditionalist Catholics who hold to the fact that the former way of being Roman Catholic before Vatican II and Vatican I for some groups, of having the Latin Mass, the TLM, the very traditional Roman Catholic model, that is the true Roman Catholic Church. And the reason I'm emphasizing this is to show you that just because they changed the language doesn't mean they did not do a lot of other changes. So what are some of these changes that Vatican II did other than allowing the local language to be used? One practical, very easily understood change was which way the priest faces, right? Within the Orthodox Church, within the church for all of time, the priest has always faced the east, right? Because why? We expect that Christ will come again in the east. The priest faces the same way that the people are facing. Vatican II changed it so that the priest doesn't have to face the east anymore, but the priest can face the people. This is a big difference. Remember that Sunday worship is not just a concert, not just a get-together. Everything has symbolism. Everything has meaning. And this is a big change. But this was the aim of Vatican II. It was to bring things more up-to-date, more accessible, less distant to the modern man. And I really think it has achieved that. I really think the Roman Catholic Church post-Vatican II is a lot more accessible, is a lot less distant, is a lot more appealing to the Western eye. But in doing so, it has fallen away from the Orthodox faith, if not 1,000 years ago, then definitely after Vatican II. Another change is the way that the Eucharistic prayers are done. The Eucharist is everything to the Christian life, okay? When you go to your Sunday worship church, the main point of it is the Eucharist, is taking the holy body and blood of Christ, right? It's the gift of God given to us. The Eucharistic prayers were changed within the Roman Catholic Church. Specifically, there's more flexibility and there's different Eucharistic prayers. This was not a thing before Vatican II. I can go on and on here, but my point is that when the post-Vatican II Roman Catholic Church became more accessible, became less distant and appealing to the Western eye, it came with changes. It came with changes, crucial changes that affected the way that worship is done in the church. What I'm getting at here is that if you're a young Western man looking into the Orthodox Church, the Roman Catholic Church, Protestant churches, trying to discern which church to join, and then you look at the Roman Catholic Church, and let's say it's a serious contender for you, and you're like, hey, I go to a Roman Catholic church and it's in English, it's accessible, it has the Western way of life. But then I go to an Orthodox church and it feels very ethnic, it's in Greek or Russian, it has like Eastern European cultures. Understand why the Western church came to be like that. Now, could the Western church have just made it so the vernacular language could be used, that in Australia English could be used, and not had done anything else? Yeah, they probably could have. I don't know why they didn't. It would have made the Roman Catholic Church a lot of a stronger contender for the faith, personally for me, than it is with the whole new Novus Ordo Mass stuff. But the reality is that when they made it so English could be used in Australia, Spanish could be used in Spain, rather than only the Latin of the Latin Mass, they changed a lot of other things, okay? So pulling this back all the way to the very beginning, as I said at the start, what's more important to you? Walking into a church, and if you live in the West, hearing English and seeing a Western way of life and things being easy and convenient and appealing, or walking into a church and knowing that even if the language is not what you speak, even if the way of life is not your way of life, that it is the Orthodox faith, that it is the original faith as found within the early church. Okay, that's just the bottom line is, and I do not think there's any valid arguments against what I've just put right there. So pulling away from the Roman Catholic Church and focusing on the Orthodox faith for a second, there's very valid reasons why it has come to be ethnic, right? Historically, for a second, you have the sacking of Constantinople in 1204, the fourth crusade of the Latin Crusaders, which, to be fair, okay, I want to point out, was not ordered by the Pope, and the Pope condemned the Latin Crusaders. But the bottom line is that a bunch of Roman Catholic Latin Crusaders from the West went in and completely pillaged and destroyed Constantinople, which was the heart of Christianity, of Eastern Christianity at the time, right? Stuff like that, as well as the Ottoman Empire, where a bunch of Muslim Turks went in and basically just destroyed Eastern Christianity. And we see a lot of that still stand today. We look to modern day Turkey, modern day Istanbul. That was once Constantinople. That was once the capital of the Roman Empire, where the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great went and established the new powerhouse of Christianity. Hence the reason it's called Constantinople, right? After Constantine, right? There's very valid historical reasons why the Orthodox Church has come to be so much smaller than the Western churches and so much more ethnic and a little more tightly together than the Western churches, seemingly being a lot more broader, okay? Because while the Western churches were going out and taking over the world and expanding, the Orthodox Christians were just trying to survive. We're just trying to ensure their wife did not get tortured and taken away from them. Stuff like that, all right? There's real historical reasons why the Orthodox Church is so much smaller, because it's been persecuted so much more. The Western churches have not been persecuted like the Orthodox Church to any degree, right? Not to any degree. But not only this, the Orthodox Church is doing a lot to be more appealing, a lot to be less distant, a lot to be more accessible to people who speak English and are Western, you know? I know very well that in America, Orthodoxy is booming, right? Orthodoxy is growing very fast. Here in Australia, we're a bit behind America, so we're slowly getting there, but we are making a lot of changes. For example, the church I go to very recently started doing monthly divine liturgies in English. Like, there are efforts being put forward. Not only this, but our current Archbishop here of the Greek Church in Australia has set forth a lot of initiatives. You know, one thing I learned recently was that back in the day, priests were not approachable, right? Walking up to a priest was not something you did, especially as someone as a Western man like myself. That was not something that happens. Today, you can walk up to an Orthodox priest. They will speak English, you know, majority of the time, and they will be interested in you as a Western man who's not Orthodox. There's real change here occurring in Australia to become more accessible, to become less distant. But crucially, the core Orthodox faith is never going to change. It can't change. It's never going to be changed simply to get more people in, as I would argue Vatican II did, right? Vatican II became more accessible, less distant, more approachable to the Western eye, but it's changed the faith, right? It lost a lot of core things of the Roman Catholic faith, I would argue. The Orthodox Church can never do that, okay? That's very important. And just to finish this video off then, one thing I found as a Western man who only speaks English is that when you step into a new culture, you have nothing to lose. I get to experience and learn an entire new culture. Like, I already know Western culture. I already know English. I don't need more Western culture. I don't need more English. But stepping into a Greek culture or a Russian culture, I get to learn Greek and Russian. I get to learn about the Greek and Russian ways of life. I get to learn about so many different things that I would not be learning if I stepped into just a Western church, right? There's so many benefits that you can't look past. Don't take it for granted. It's nothing but a blessing if you're someone who's a Western man wanting to walk into a Greek Orthodox, Romanian, Serbian, Russian Orthodox church, right? In the beginning, sure, it's going to be difficult. You just pick up some easy words, right? In the Greek, it's a very simple language, like every language, just very simple words, basic conversational skills. And after a year or two, you'll suddenly be speaking another language. Not only that, but that opens up so many pathways that you may have not found within Western churches. You know, being in a Greek church, I get to practice my Greek. One day, I want to go visit many holy Orthodox places in Europe, areas in Greece, areas around the Mediterranean, where having Greek is going to be very useful, right? These are doors that may have not been opened up for me within Western churches. And there's just a new way of life that you get opened up to. And one thing I've found, and I can only speak for myself here, but I've also found this to be very common amongst other Orthodox converts who don't speak Greek, is that the Divine Liturgy in Greek is 10 and a half times better than in the English, right? I've experienced multiple Divine Liturgies in the Greek or in the English. I would choose the Greek every time. I think a lot of misunderstandings that people make looking into the Orthodox Church when they experience the Divine Liturgy is that because they don't know what's going on, because they can't understand it, they think they're missing out on a lot, okay? And they think they're missing out on a lot because when you would go to a Western church, obviously you understand what's going on, much more likely, but especially Protestant evangelical churches, the sermon is the focus, and it's very different every Sunday. And so as a result, if you were to go visit a Protestant or evangelical church, and you don't know what the language is, if you know, let's say it did it in English and you don't speak English, yeah, it's kind of pointless because the whole point is the sermon, is what the pastor is talking about, okay? That's not the same thing in the Orthodox Church. The Divine Liturgy, the Sunday worship in the Orthodox Church, is the same every Sunday. Sure, it has different psalms, different gospel readings, different saints are being commemorated, you know, depending on the feast day, if it's Christmas or Easter, all right? There's going to be differences, sure, but the core part is always the same. And the Greek that you're hearing is more or less repetitions of really the same things over and over. Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy. Holy Theotokos, intercede for us. Saints, intercede for us. The readings of scripture, the reading of Psalms, it's all essentially the same thing every week. As I said, there's nuances here, nuances there, but it's essentially the same thing. So as someone who doesn't speak the Greek, I know I'm not missing out on a lot. I'm just essentially hearing over and over, Lord have mercy. Holy Theotokos, intercede for us. Saints, intercede for us. You know, different psalm readings. The priest saying this, the priest saying that, you know, may your spirit be with peace and stuff like that. It's all essentially the same words being said over and over. And I know that I'm not missing out on a lot. And at the core things, I am knowing what's going on. The Eucharist, I know what's going on there. The gospel, I know what's going on there, right? To wrap this up, there's really no valid reason that you can't become Orthodox because it's ethnic, right? There's not, like, I'm trying to think of a valid reason, right? It's only a blessing. There's only benefits to find from it. And when you look at it comparatively and you think to yourself, you know, the Orthodox Church is ethnic, whereas the Western churches are more accessible to the Western man, those had consequences. The reason why Western churches, as I just explained in this video, why they speak the local language, why they're so much less distant and accessible to Western man, is because they fell from the Orthodox faith, right? That came with it, right? Changing their core prayer came along with that. I'll tell you right now, I will be in a Divine Liturgy in Greek for the rest of my life, rather than have a Divine Liturgy in English if it changed, right? 100%, 10 out of 10 times. So yeah, thank you for watching this video. Hope this clears up. If anyone is in the discernment process and wanting to know why the Orthodox Church is so ethnic, like, it's not a valid reason. As I mentioned in this video, like, yes, it's going to cause friction, but you need to really ultimately decide what's more important to you. Ease, convenience, or the truth. And even then, like if it's not easy, if it's not convenient, being in an Orthodox Church that's ethnic, there's just blessings. Right? There's only blessings. It's only a gift, and there's so many valid historical reasons why. So, thank you for watching. God bless.